everyone. Welcome to another episode of OpsCast, brought to you by marketingops.com, powered by all the Mo pros out there. I'm your host, Michael Hartmann, flying solo today. In today's conversation, we are going to be talking about something that almost every marketing ops leader has felt, but not everyone knows how to diagnose. So why does it take so long to get anything out the door? Why do approvals multiply every time something breaks? Why do teams work harder and still not see better results? So all about process. So joining me for that conversation today is my guest, Joe Bockerstette. He's a partner at Business Enterprise Mapping. Joe is a former PwC partner, has led CPG companies, and has spent more than 30 years helping mid-size and public companies untangle complex workflows and redesign how their organizations actually function. His firm maps entire business systems, including marketing, to show companies exactly why they're getting the results they're getting and what needs to change. So Joe, welcome to OpsCast.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. And I think we talked about this. I worked at Price Waterhouse, and people go like, "Oh, PwC." I was like, "No, Price Waterhouse." Before the C part
There
came
was
about.
a difference, right?
Yeah, yeah. So bringing back old memories. All right. Well, why don't we start with when I introduced you, we use the term business system, right? And I think that probably has a lot of different, like people probably have different ideas in their mind. Like, what does that mean to you? And maybe how is that different, like from, I guess, documenting just some marketing processes in our world?
Right. So a business system is a collection of processes that fulfills one of the primary purposes of an enterprise, right? So at Business Enterprise Mapping, we define 12 standard business systems in any enterprise, and that architecture allows us to compare work across industries and size and type, et cetera. So in some ways they're departments, but when you look at actual organizations, it doesn't always match up that way. For instance, marketing department, we would consider a marketing business system. For example, you would have a sales department would be a sales business system. And let's just take sales because I know we're going to talk about marketing a lot today. And so the purpose of a sales system is to deliver customers and orders. Right? It exists in order to create orders that the operation system's going to fulfill. And so when you look at an overall enterprise, a business system fulfills a key purpose that when combined with other business systems sort of fulfills the entire mission of the enterprise. And any given business system is comprised of a series of business processes that enable that business system to achieve its purpose.
Okay, so this is like, so I'm familiar with something called EOS. You probably have heard of it, Enterprise Operating System. Is it something kind of like that where it feels like that one that I'm not an expert at, but it sounds like it's that one I feel like has a little more bent towards organizational structure as opposed to the systems and processes behind it.
This is more business model design, if you will, right? Leadership has a responsibility to design the business model that fulfills the purpose of that system, of that enterprise. Let's take marketing, right? We'll just dive into marketing. So we've done a tremendous amount of marketing, both agencies and in-house. And they're all a little different, but I'm going to generalize, right? In general, the purpose of marketing is to do what? Provide qualified leads, right? And so all activity in marketing is bent towards handing over to sales a qualified lead that sales can turn into a customer in an order, right? So when you frame the marketing system, where does it begin? Well, marketing as a system begins with a target market, a target community of individuals, entities, whatever, that you desire to turn into a qualified lead that we're going to pass off to sales, right?
Like what some people call it with TAM, total addressable market kind of.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So in a pragmatic manner, we go into a new state, we open up a new state, right? So that state and the profile of our target customer becomes the target market. And our mission is to turn more of those target customers into qualified leads. Right now, what do we do in order to make that happen? We have a series of processes, and it can vary greatly, but
Sure.
it's lead generation, social media, content development, content management, web management, uh, email outreach, advertising, marketing campaigns. Like all of those are examples of processes that would begin maybe with an annual plan. That annual plan would turn into a campaign calendar. That campaign calendar would turn into campaigns. We would execute those campaigns using the various elements of content that informs them, and we would ultimately close out those campaigns with a successful lead generation capability that we turned that those targets into qualified leads we can pass on to sales.
Okay. So I want to ask a couple questions. So I
Sure.
think there's sort of a hierarchy, for lack of a better term, of like you've got the
Mhm.
marketing system, if you will, and then within that, it's made up of processes, and
That's right.
then kind of the other thing you gave the example of then those processes get broken down, and then I
Mhm.
guess you kind of overlay then the organizational structure becomes a
Yeah.
part of how you know, enable that system to work.
Precisely. So we would
Okay.
argue that you design the business model first, being the workflow model, and then you lay the organization structure on top of that workflow model
Mm,
so that the organization is in sync with the business model itself.
sure.
Most times when we start work with clients, the organization structure is out of sync with the workflow model, right? And that's one of the reasons you get delays and approvals and disconnects, waste, right? It comes out of the fact that the
Right.
org structure is out of sync with the actual work itself.
Okay. So I want that's good. That's why I'm glad I confirmed that. Um, the other part you mentioned marketing primary
Mhm.
purpose to deliver leads to sales, especially B2B space. I think that's
Mhm.
true. Uh, I think and I think other people listening might argue that there's other purposes like, because I mean, I guess you could link it to ultimately to demand, but like
Sure.
brand, I think
Yeah.
I, my view of this has changed a little bit. Like the building brand awareness is part
Mhm.
of that, right? Is
Yeah.
you're looking a little further out in the future, depending on what your
Right.
sales like.
Mhm.
So do you layer that in as well? Like, is that a
Sure.
separate process, or is that a subsystem of marketing in the way you think about it? How does that work?
No, it's part of the marketing system. Remember, I just said we were going to generalize at the front.
Yeah, yeah. I'm
Yeah,
curious.
but I've got no hesitation to adopt brand awareness as well,
Okay.
right? Brand strength, all of that can fall. When you think of the purpose of a marketing system, it can be, a half a dozen primary purposes, right? Lead
Okay.
generation being one, brand awareness being another, right? But all of the processes that would exist inside those boundaries would be part of that same contribution to purpose. Now, each of those processes has a primary deliverable. So when you think about achieving the purpose of the system, I've got a series of deliverables that need to contribute to that purpose, right?
Right.
So when I'm designing the business model of marketing, I need to look at what's the primary purpose of marketing, what are the deliverables that we need to produce in order to fulfill that purpose, and then what are the processes that we're going to need in order to create those deliverables, right? So it's very hierarchically, systematically built, so all the pieces of the puzzle fall in the right place in order to generate the overall purpose of our intention.
Got it. Okay. So that's again, glad I asked for that clarification. So you mentioned that you've worked with both sort of in-house
Mhm.
keep it to marketing and marketing
Right,
organizations as well as agencies. Like what are
right.
the similarities and differences that you see between them
Yeah.
from this standpoint?
So from the content itself, they're all pretty similar, right? We have graphics, we have content management, we have social media, we have web, we have outreach, right? We have campaigns. The difference between an agency and in-house are generally two things. Agencies generally have an account management function, the playmaker, if you will, between the client and the shop itself. And so they're funneling communications between the internal production and capabilities and project campaign management to the external customer. They're managing that relationship and the communication, and they're primary point of communications. You don't typically see that in-house, right? The
Mm-hmm.
second component that you generally see with agencies are much more cost budget focused. An agency creates a contract with a client and it strives to make profit on that contract by tracking basically the internal projects that are executed in order to fulfill that contract, right? In-house, again, not so much. We don't generally see in-house agencies so concerned about that project management contract cost relationship that you see in the
Right.
external agencies.
Okay. It's considered more of a kind of a fixed cost for the overall
Mhm.
organization as opposed to project-based cost
That's right.
allocations.
Agencies are basically project management companies who execute contracts with clients, fulfill those contracts, and leave satisfied clients to create more contracts, we hope.
Right, right. Yes, that hopefully, yeah.
Right.
I'm sure,
That's
I'm
the
sure.
goal.
Yeah. I, yeah. Okay. Yes, it's interesting. Hadn't thought about that difference that way in terms of the, yeah, like the cost tracking piece, because I think in my experience, mostly in-house, right? When I've been asked, like, couldn't we allocate our costs to campaigns, for example, right? It's like we can, but I wouldn't recommend it because anything that's sort of
Right.
indirect cost is just like really hard to allocate as the number of things you're allocating to changes,
Yeah.
uh, or something gets stopped or canceled it's just really hard. And like direct
Well,
costs, totally fine.
yes,
Whereas agencies probably need to do that.
agencies really, that's their business, right? That's their
Yeah.
core value proposition. The other thing I'll mention that I think is different about agencies in my experiences are much more focused on the metrics of client satisfaction, internal waste, lead time, cycle times, much more focused on the operating metrics of performing well against those contract requirements and testing the temperature of client satisfaction on how they're doing.
Hmm. Yeah. Makes sense. So I remember when we talked before, there was an idea that let's see if I get it right. Every organization is perfectly designed to get the results it gets.
Right,
So, like,
right.
what does that mean?
Yeah,
And then especially for a marketing team that's maybe or marketing ops team, and considering that's our main audience, frustrated with their own ability
right.
to execute or performance.
Yeah, so that quote goes back to a book called Designing Organizations for High Performance by David Hanna out of Procter& and Gamble back in the 80s or 90s. I worked a lot with Procter& and Gamble when I was with PwC. And the quote is all organizations are perfectly designed to get the results they get. And I still use that quote, obviously,
Yeah.
frequently today. And here's the implications of it. As leaders, it tells us that we can understand the reasons we're getting the outcomes we get, right? Like the frustration is, I don't understand why things don't work the way I want them to. I don't understand why it takes so long. I don't
Yep.
understand why it costs so much. I don't understand why it's not better, right? So, in understanding that organization design underpins performance, I can diagnose the cause and effect relationships between why things aren't working the way I want them to and what I need to do differently to make it better. So that's the one side. Concurrent with that, however, comes the responsibility for leadership to do something about it, right? By understanding that there are reasons behind it and these reasons can be addressed, it's now my responsibility to address those reasons, create a different and better organization design that overcomes the problems I'm experiencing and gets the performance I desire to get.
Yeah. It's funny. It reminded me of Bill Parcells, the football coach, coached the Cowboys for like
Yeah.
two seasons or whatever it was, and I think he had something that was like, um, your your performance is, in this case, right? Your standings, or like what your win
Mm.
loss ratio was, like is really who you are, right?
Yeah. You
No
are
matter what.
what your record says you are.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, I think that's it. And so it
Right.
sounds like a parallel to that, right? I mean, it's an
Right.
interesting thing. So what do you think about this? So, because I've seen this before where it's kind of obvious that there's problems within
Right.
an organization, and I often like I've coached some people personally, who are struggling with how do I deal with this situation, and it becomes one where I go like, either the leadership doesn't see the problem,
Hmm.
or they see it, but they either are they're afraid to address it, they don't know how to address it, but they just ignore it, right? And
Right.
like either like in both of those situations, it's bad. Like
It is.
so,
Yeah.
I,
So we know from experience about 70% of all problems relate to process deficiencies, right? And from a leadership perspective, it really comes down to two sort of ideas. One is we accept the way it is the way it is, right? Like there's nothing I can do about it. It is what it is, and I'm a victim of the system, and there's nothing I can do
right,
about that system. And then secondarily, I'm overwhelmed by the system and don't know how to get started, right? We have some great examples. I had a product development system example, very large CPG company. We were on a front end of scoping and planning, and we were there a couple of days. And the head of product development says to me, you've done more to solve our problems in 2 days than we've been able to do in 2 years, right? Because it didn't have the template, the model to attack the problem. Like you look at it, you throw your hands up and say, I don't know what to do and I don't know where to begin, right? Well, that's our business model, is
right.
attacking that sort of complicated, overwhelming, intimidating, large workflow that we can't wrap our arms around and wrestle to the ground. So that's, we've been doing that for over 30 years now.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people get stuck and they sort of the imagination of what could be possible. They've
Right,
kind of lost that muscle a little bit.
right, right.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've seen, I think probably people listening have seen too in marketing, is let's say you've got a process that you think is working smoothly, and then inevitably there's some sort of mistake,
Right.
bad launch, the email has mistakes in it, and the reaction from the organization is to just put in more rules, more reviews, more
Mm.
approvals, like all these kinds of things that I think, I get the the instinct to have that kind of reaction, but to me, that's usually made things worse instead of better in
Right.
terms of being able to actually like. Do you see the same thing, and do you have any
We
recommendations on
do.
how to avoid that?
Yeah, so we do see that, and a couple of implications of that. Number one, it slows everything down. Number two, it introduces as many errors as it fixes. Number three, ultimately, folks go around the system. I can't tell you how many clients we start work with where the final approval sits on the executive VP's desk, but the project's already gone, right?
Yeah,
Like the VP's waiting to approve something that executed a week ago because nobody waits around for it anyway, right? And so it just introduces more reasons for things to go wrong, basically, in the flow, right? See,
yeah,
when you're designing for high performance, right, it begins with that primary purpose that we talked about at the end of the stream. What are we trying to accomplish? What are the deliverables that will facilitate accomplishing that? Now, let's start with those, right? What are the
right,
specs on those deliverables? How are we performing against those specs? How will we measure how we're performing? Most of the improvement comes at that stage. Who's my customer? What do they want? What am I providing? What do I need to do differently? And let's go fix those problems. That's always a great place to start. In a marketing system, you're generally talking about 20 or less processes, even in the very large ones. And we've worked with some of the largest
sure,
in the world. You're talking 20 or less processes. 20 or less processes are producing well under 50 primary deliverables, maybe even 25. So the point is you can wrap your arms around this and really focus on doing the important things well.
Would you say that number of deliverables, you mean the types of deliverables, not?
No, I mean types. Yeah, a final
Yeah, okay.
report, a written blog,
Website pages.
a
Yeah, okay.
website page, right?
Okay. But there
Um,
may be multiple of those over the, I just wanted to
yeah,
make sure. Yeah, okay.
right. But a type, yeah, that's fair, right?
Yeah, yeah. Okay. That makes sense. My dog agrees. She's helping. Okay, so I'm curious, what so one of the things that because I've seen this before multiple times, maybe walk us through a little more in the detail about the approach for mapping. And
Yeah,
like one of the struggles I find is when you get this, whether it's an overreaction or I walk into a place where it's already got this like highly structured, lots of approval levels, that you're saying point,
mhm,
right? It's somebody
right,
who's expected to approve but doesn't, basically never does. Like, how do you get into things like defining the processes, the
right.
steps or tasks that go into it? Do you do anything like a RACI?
We do.
How do you measure it?
Yeah.
Like all those things. How do you do that? And then what
mm,
have you found surprises people most when you go through that with them?
Yeah. So when let's just take a marketing group, let's say there are 10 processes, just to pick a smaller number, round number, we would produce what we call a process playbook for each of those 10, right? And we would identify a process owner and a process team to work with. The process owner understands how the process operates today. The process team might be users, subject matter experts, whatever, right? We will facilitate sessions. We generally work on remote at this point, Zoom or Teams. We'll facilitate sessions to map, document how the work is done today. We do it real time. We use Visio as the mapping tool. So just like this podcast, we would be mapping on the screen while we're facilitating the group, right? That takes about 5 hours over 3 sessions per process. So, and we do this as a project. So 10 processes, we'd be putting in about 50 hours getting the baselines built,
Mm,
right? We then take you to what we call a system alignment workshop where we bring all of those process owners together. This tends to be on site. We put all these flows up on posters and then we troubleshoot the disconnects, the misunderstandings, the duplications, the gaps, all of the issues around the larger flow. It starts with that target market, ends with that qualified lead, and everything that's taking place in between. We then go into a series of analysis, right? We analyze the customer supplier relationship. Each of these processes has a customer. Who
mm,
is that customer? What do they want? What are we providing? What do we need to do differently? What information is being used by that process? How does that process interact with technology, hardware and software? What's the RACI diagram? Who's responsible for what in that process? What are the red clouds? So we identify what we call red clouds when we map a process. Red clouds are the problems and opportunities getting in the way of what you're trying to accomplish, right? And the metrics, what metrics are we measuring or not measuring in that process? And so it's a very extensive analytical exercise once we've created and documented the process itself, ultimately yielding a process improvement plan per process of quick wins. Quick wins are red clouds that can be solved in 90 days without a budget request,
mm.
right? The dumb
Okay.
low hanging fruit, right? So if you've got 10 processes, you're going to have about 25 tasks a process, about 250 tasks. You're going to have about 300 red clouds. About 150 of those are going to be quick wins, right? So there's plenty to go work on right away. And then we do an overall system improvement plan that puts together a plan over the next year or two to improve the whole system with opportunities that are larger than just process level quick wins, right? And so, and we can do all that really well inside of a couple of months. Like from the point you would start a first conversation to having an entire system fully mapped, implementation plans in place, and starting to implement as well under 90 days.
So I'm curious about like one of the things that I've seen that I've diagnosed is like unclear roles and responsibilities,
Mhm.
specifically
Right.
around review and approval, and
Specifically, you got it. Right.
yeah, and then in particular, like having the same level of scrutiny, regardless of what the whatever is being produced.
Right. Right.
When you think about that, do you and then with races, I've always struggled with getting a like some people try to
Yeah.
put it at such a high level that they are almost useless, and then you've
Right.
got multiple
Right.
people with the same kind of racy role,
All
and then
good.
some people
All
get
good
so
points.
super level of detail. Like, what's the right
Right.
level of detail, and
Right.
how do you deal with like this?
Yeah.
I think
So
reaction
here's
to do multiple levels of approval and
yeah.
lots of
So
people
we
who
do
can
RACI at
veto.
the task level, but let me broaden the question a little bit. One of the paradigm shifts for marketing that we often lay in place is marketing is a project management system. Right. And it is the management of campaigns or the management of client contracts. It's the access of a variety of content contributors and bits and pieces that contribute to that project or that campaign. But ultimately, it's the overarching management of work through a flow of a requirement that gets fulfilled, right? And we're often putting in place review systems, milestones, right? Stage gates, elements of commonality and logical review to sort of take out the unclarity of who's responsible for what when, right? I'm just to make it up. We may have a 1 month stage. Let's say it's a 9 month relationship, just to pick some sort of time frame. We may have monthly review cycles that include what deliverables are being reviewed by that month, who's in the meeting, if you will, who's responsible for approval, and what's the criteria for approval,
Mm,
right? So that you formalize that in a way that is very clear who's doing what when based on what criteria, right? As you mentioned, every time we walk into a marketing group, roles and responsibilities are unclear
yeah,
without question. And largely because the work is not organized into project thinking or campaign thinking. It's sort of disjointed work, all being sort of thrown out there to be picked up and moved along as available, if you will, not driven by calendars and driven
yeah.
by sequencing and driven by approvals and responsibilities.
I think you said something that really caught my attention there because I love the idea of being clear about who can approve versus who has input, and they're it's not
Precisely. And what's the
not
criteria, right? What's the
that
pass fail,
criteria
right?
is I had not really, I mean, I probably intuitively thought about it, but like we asked
Mm-hmm.
what constitutes something that can be approved or not,
Mm-hmm.
and what's the timeline, and what happens if that person, like if there's somebody who's expected to review and approve and
Right,
they miss the time window, like what do we do? Like those kinds of
right.
things I think need to be clearly stated. Um, and I mean, what I found is that two things most commonly happen, right? One, it's really unclear. So you got instead of a approver, you've got three or four people who all have veto power, right?
Right.
And so things go through
Exactly.
multiple rounds. You don't know if they have conflicting feedback, and then you're really screwed because you
Right.
don't
And
know
then it
what to
sits in
take.
somebody's inbox for 2 weeks because they didn't get to
Yeah,
it. And, yeah.
yeah. And then and then the other on the flip side is people get crushed for a mistake or something
Right.
that is considered a mistake, and some of it is objectively a mistake. Put the wrong date
Right.
for a webinar, right? Wrong time for a
Right.
webinar. Some
Yeah.
of it is subjective mistake, which is
Interpretation.
I didn't like the way that this looked or
Mm,
who it went
right.
to, and they get killed for it. So that
Right.
you get that reaction like, oh, now we need even more review
Right.
approval.
See, the
And
point is, if you intentionally design these sort of big elements on the front end, it makes it easier to run the system, right? If
yeah,
I know what deliverable specs are, if I know what go, no go means, if I know who's approving it at what point, just to use that example, then I can operate the system in a standard, repeatable way, right?
yeah. No, I think that's great, and it sets a. But I'm a huge believer that what you need to do is have a lot of that in place. I the struggle I'm having with what you described is it sounds um, th- that level of detail on that kind of stuff, it to some degree sounds onerous, like it's almost a burden.
Mm.
Whereas, but it could be that my perspective. So the way I like to think about these, like I'm a big fan of having processes defined and things like that,
Right.
but I want them to be defined at a level that allows for essentially more like
Yeah.
guardrails, unless it has to be explicit, like you must do this, right?
Yeah.
But there's very few things where that's the case, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um, but
Mhm.
having guardrails and letting people interpret it and move things along,
Right.
right?
You
So,
got it. So let me explain. Right. So our process maps are at the task level. Right. So it identifies the steps in the process, if you will. How that task gets accomplished is not defined unless you want it to be defined through a task instruction. So the opportunity, just take graphics, for instance, a sort of a creative area. There can be a task called design, right? And then your six graphic artists can design in their own sort of creative way,
right.
fulfilling that task. Now, there may be tasks where you want specific instructions defined, right? Like a lab test, just to pick something that's different, right? So it's all available. It can be as flexible or as thorough as you want it to be. But what you definitely want is you want to understand the processes inside that system, what the primary deliverables are for each of those processes, and what steps are required in what sequence to make those deliverables happen.
Mhm. The other thing that you said that was interesting, and you said it multiple times in our conversation already, is
Mm.
describing marketing as a project management function, which is
Right.
interesting because so our audience being marketing ops folks are probably nodding their
Mm.
heads going, yeah, well, that's what
Yeah.
we do. And in fact, if Mike was here, my co-host, Mike Rizzo, he has been advocating for a view of marketing ops
Mhm.
specifically. So, the technology and execution
Right.
arm of it, of being almost like being treated like a product management
Right.
function.
Yeah.
Do you think,
Hmm.
does that make sense
Yeah.
to you too?
Yeah, yeah. It is the execution. I always use the term campaigns as a marketing term, but you can call us. It is the execution of an intention, right? And there are a series of steps and deliverables to execute that intention, right? We've worked very, very large public company in marketing ops where they were executing email and phone campaigns, right? And every little digit was essential. If you screw one thing up and the whole, thousands of people get the wrong thing, right? And so
Yeah.
it is the execution of projects, right, with specific requirements and very, very tight tolerances in that case. And you got to have a scripted process flow and an understanding of the guardrails in order to make that successful.
Gotcha. So you mentioned that term red clouds, and I like that. It's
Yeah,
kind of an interesting, like it's very visual, right? So it makes sense.
right.
But so if you think about the work you've done with marketing
Mm.
teams, if you think about it from an ops lens, ops and technology, what are some of the common things that you've seen where opportunities are identified within that space that you would call red clouds?
Yeah, so really across industry, across even functional, the red clouds tend to be pretty common, right? Undefined process would be number one. Uh, Process variation. Most clients I work with have multiple departments or locations where different people do the same things different ways, right? Very, very common in the work we do. Undefined deliverables, that customer supplier relationship. Who's the customer? What do they want? What are we providing? Are we getting it right or not? Unmanaged data, it starts out inadequate on the front and just gets pushed through the whole system till it crashes at the back. Very, very common, right? Missing performance metrics, right? We're not measuring our performance. Our org structure is out of sync with our workflow. We've got really goofy responsibilities. The implication of all this is you can't hold people accountable, right? If you don't have the foundational elements in place, then the idea that I'm going to hold you accountable for your work's a little silly because so much of it's out of your control. What are you going to do about it, right? Um, let's see, lack of clarity in roles and responsibilities, very, very common. Sort of comes with that misaligned org structure issue. Um, you can find inadequate information system matchup, right? A system doesn't match to the real needs of that business, right? And so you've got one of my favorite stories, we worked with a bank where over 50% of all their tasks were either Outlook, Word, or Excel, right? So what that tells you is they spent all their time working around their ERP system, right? Because it wasn't a good fit for what they were doing, right? So you get this sort of automation can enable or hinder what you're trying to accomplish, right?
I always
And
used
we find
to,
it hinders more than
yeah.
enables.
Well, it accelerates bad processes, right? It's just,
It makes it, a good process makes it easy to do the right thing, right? A bad process makes it difficult to do the right thing, and we see far more of those than good
yeah.
ones.
Okay, so I want to go back to my reaction to this as being feeling a little bit overwhelming or
Hmm.
burdensome, because I think a lot of the people who are listening to our podcast are at smaller firms, right?
Hmm.
Maybe even growth startups, things like that. How and they can afford maybe to bring in consultants for this.
Hmm.
Like, how would you advise them? Like, how would you suggest they start if they said, "Oh yeah, we need to be better about having clear roles and
Yeah,
responsibilities and understanding our
right.
processes, and yada yada yada." So how would you guide them to go like if you need to go do like what's the first thing to do and the second thing
Yeah,
to do and so on?
so I would say this. The first thing to do is, and we're talking about marketing, let's say specifically marketing. The first thing to do is let's identify the primary purpose of what we're trying to accomplish with our system, right? Whether it's brand awareness, whether it's lead generation, marketing and sales often gets sort of scrunched together today. So it can be a sale, right? If you put marketing and sales together through an online strategy, for instance, it can all be put together. But the point is, what are we trying to accomplish? What deliverables are we producing inside this system today to accomplish it? What shape do we think they're in? Where are things going wrong? What processes would need to exist in order to do this well? And sort of where do we stand? What's our landscape relative to that intention? And then lastly, look at that organization structure. I see so many organizations where people are responsible for stuff because that person's a hero and we know we can throw more on them and they'll do a great job,
Mhm.
and things get cobbled up, right? You want your organization structure to perfectly align with your workflow so that you can manage it well, right? If you don't have somebody responsible for let me just pick an example, client data, which is something we find in bad shape almost everywhere we go. Well, if nobody is responsible for the client data setup, let's say it's being done in 6 different locations by 6 different people, what do you expect? It's going to be
Right.
bad,
Yeah.
right? And so you're aligning all of those elements into what do I intentionally want to accomplish and where do I stand today relative to that intention?
So maybe this is so one of the things that I have done in leadership roles and I've coached people on is because they're trying to understand the capacity of the team and who's got what
Right.
and watching out for where we've got a single point of
Mm.
failure, for example,
Right.
um, is like literally like it feels like this could have been a step towards what you're describing. Like I'll make a list like these are the types of tasks my team is responsible for. And then
Right.
here's the team across the top of a little bit of a matrix. You're like who's the primary person or primary couple of people who are secondary
Right.
because it usually what it reveals is there's gaps, right? Tasks we're expected to
Correct.
do, and we don't have somebody currently who is the primary person for that or secondary at all. And so it helped me kind of go like, okay, where do we have gaps, right? So it helped me
Right.
go fight for budget for headcount, for example, which is an outgrowth
Exactly.
of that.
Or
But more
reorganize.
importantly, yeah, but more importantly, it was, hey, like, what are we not able to do today without, you know, potentially burning people out because they're just getting
Right.
thrown into something, and um, and then making sure that people could take time off, right? Because there was somebody who could back them up, even if that was me.
Yeah.
So is that a step, like a part of what you're talking about that would
It
help,
is,
or
right. So you
okay,
would call that a system skills matrix, right? And you
okay,
would be matching up the available resources with the content of the work itself, right? Very, very common. And typically run out of HR, right?
mm.
But, it varies
I
greatly
don't think they
across
understand. I don't think they
the
understand the
enterprise.
domain well enough to be able to do that. I wouldn't.
Yeah,
I mean, I've worked with some good HR partners, but I don't know that
right.
any of them know it
Yeah.
deeply enough
But
to be able to
remember,
do something like
HR
that.
is responsible for more than, right? So they've got that same sort of challenge across the whole enterprise. But yes,
Right. Yeah, yeah. No,
and
I'm just not
and
to
you're well
dismiss. Like,
positioned to do that. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's not to dismiss their help, but I
Well, I get
wouldn't.
it.
I wouldn't. I wouldn't expect them to do that.
Mhm.
Like that,
Yeah.
to me, that's part of the job of being a leader is
Yeah.
to anticipate that and do that. Um, it's interesting. Okay. Um, what? This may be fairly tactical, but when you guys do the process mapping piece,
Mhm.
uh, is there a particular format that you use? Do you do, you
Yeah.
said Visio, so flow diagrams use swim lane stuff? Do you do
We do
just
not.
step by
So
step?
we use a method we call Paragon. So Paragon is our
Mm,
name for what we do. Perigon, which is a 360-degree view of an object, right?
okay,
We use Visio with a Paragon library of templates, tools, icons, stencils, like it's our own language. Our map is a vertical map, very easy to train, very logical to follow,
okay,
and it stood the test of time for 30 something years now. It's amazing to me. It was invented by an electrical engineer who use schematic methodologies for
sure,
workflow, right? So it's very,
yes,
very sound. We're the only ones in the world that do it the way we do it. And it's more detailed, more thorough, and more illustrative than other maps, much easier to follow. And then
okay,
for the backside of the playbook, we use Excel because everybody can use Excel,
yeah,
and our method is based on the idea it's not that hard to figure out what's wrong. You just got to ask the people doing the work. Like there's
yeah.
plenty to work on when you ask somebody, why does
It's
this
usually
order
well
entry not
known.
work? Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Right. Like why does order entry not work? Well, oh my God, I can't believe nobody's ever. And it just starts spewing. And so we have no problem figuring out the cause and effect relationships between
sure,
why things are going wrong and where, right? And so
yeah,
you're producing a playbook per process, and tends to be 30 to 50 pages, although it's digital.
okay,
And it's easily updatable, right? It's
yeah,
also easily transferred. Like we'll train clients to do what we do. And our goal in general is to start the early work, get the ball rolling, and turn it over to an internal client team to take it and run with it.
got it. All right, when we read like one more question, then we'll wrap
Mhm.
up. So I'm curious. So maybe tied to the people I talked about who are in like growth companies.
Mhm.
So part of this is going to be a challenge, like going from where they are and then they need to
Yeah.
scale over time.
Yes.
What are signals that they can be looking for when it's
Right.
time to rethink the system versus just sort of throw more bodies at it or power through
Yeah,
it?
that is a great question. The majority of the work we do in all business systems is that, right? We are growing rapidly and we've got to do something. So, a couple of signs would be where fracturing today, let's say we're on a large growth path and our people are stressed and overworked, and we're seeing some busts in the system, and we're really at our limit. And so I'm faced with, I'm going to say doubling by next year just to pick a big number. And if I don't change anything, that means I've got to add 50 people or 100 people.
Mm,
And it doesn't make sense to me, right, that I've got to double my workforce to double my volume. Just to,
yes.
again, pick a number. There's got to be a way to scale that I can implement to prevent the need for me to, like, I can't absorb 100 people next year, just to pick that number, right?
Sure.
I've got to find a way to get the work done without that. And so that really triggers the idea we've got to look at process. And so we've got to understand our process. We've got to standardize our process. Then we've got to automate our process in a way that allows us to super scale without adding a bunch of people.
Yeah. It reminds me of a project I did years ago at a big semiconductor company where I was asked to go figure out how could we enable technical support to support more customers as revenue is growing at
Yeah,
a certain pace without, because historically it had grown at the same pace, and they wanted to capture more of the profit from that, right? So they're like bend the
right.
cost curve, if you will. And
Yeah, the one other point to add on that is if you just throw software on top of that without really understanding the system and the requirements and what your business model is, it just makes a mess. And it ends up being more of an inhibitor than an enabler, right? Because I don't
yeah,
put the right switches on, I don't make the right decisions about A, B, or C, and end up with something that really makes it difficult to do the right thing.
yeah. Oh, it's interesting. It's kind of going back to the roots of my early consulting career doing
It's a fun
process
business.
design. Yeah, it's to some degree these are it feels like a little bit of fundamentals, but it's good to see that
Mhm.
there's like a little more structure for it.
Yeah.
Joe, been a pleasure talking to you. If folks want to, if they're interested in continuing the conversation or just want to learn more about what you're doing, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so it's www.businessmapping.com, and my email is joe@businessmapping.com. Just feel free to reach out. It's been a pleasure.
All right, good. Well, I appreciate it again, Joe. Thank you. Thanks to our audience out there for continuing to support us. We appreciate it. If you have ideas for topics or guests or want to be a guest like Joe, please reach out and we'd be happy to get the ball rolling. Until next time. Bye, everybody.